All right, hello, hello, hello. I'm here speaking with my homie. I don't know how you want to be called, actually. That's
Call me
never
Joe, GKR, whatever your heart desires. It's
Joe
fine.
GKR. My heart's all over the place. I've only ever known you by three letters.
Were they JOE?
Yeah, I guess they are now. Why don't you go ahead and start by telling everybody what it is you do and why we're having this conversation?
I am a lovely third year law student. I have a master's degree in criminal justice. I'm finishing my law degree. Um, I, for roughly 5 minutes, attempted to do like that stupid debate panel thing. I'm like, I hate all these people. I'm not doing this. I will not. I will not. Lower myself to that. Anyway, so I obsessively read about like the Supreme Court. Beyond just my legal education. So,
What are some things you've found about the Supreme Court that you feel particularly insightful that you'd like to share?
I think I think my favorite. I think this is like my favorite thing for like conspiracy theories, right? Like there are real conspiracies in this world, and everyone just wants to believe stupid ones. I mentioned the Powell memo to you. We don't have to spend like a ton of time on. There's actually a really good podcast that just came out. You can find Sheldon Whitehouse, the senator from like Rhode Island, had like a 34 part video series of him speaking on the floor of the Senate, talking about this conspiracy to take over the federal court system. Um, and then there's a recent podcast called Master Plan, I believe. And it's really good if anyone's so interested in an actual conspiracy that did occur to whatever. So anyway, so the Powell memo is written by Supreme Court Justice Lewis Powell several months before he got on the bench, and basically said like, "Hey, we're losing to the libs, and big business needs to defend itself, and here's what we have to do." And he wrote this memo for the Better Business Bureau, and basically said, "What we need to do is build like alternatives to into alternatives to academia." Using our money, we need to work in a concentrated effort and do this over decades and have a long term plan. We need to take over the courts and make sure we get business friendly ideologies in there. We need to like fund candidates and speech that promotes like our pro business like agenda and a whole bunch of other stuff that I'm forgetting the specifics of. But essentially, it's everything you see like right now, where like we have money influencing politics, corporations as people. All of that is basically what this guy wrote in a memo for their long term plan for the conservative legal movement. And how one of their key things was taking over the federal court system, which shortly after that, I believe Nixon appointed him to the Supreme Court.
Your thesis is that the recent slate of rulings, which have benefited business, is the byproduct of a conspiracy enacted several decades ago.
Well, and ongoing. It led to the founding of the Federal Society by Antonin Scalia and Bork. And I believe it's Bork and some other guy whose name always escapes me. Which is now the Leonard Leo project that handpicked Trump's Supreme Court justices for him. Literally, Trump said, "I'm going to let the Federal Society choose my justices" in 2016, and that was probably one of the things that pushed him over to like win the election. That he was like, "Oh," because the Conservative Project was always hell bent on taking over the judiciary. You saw that come to like particular like I guess a head in two things. One, the failed nomination of Harriet Miers in 2000.
Yes, George Bush's own counsel, right? Like,
yeah, like a close family friend of his, and it was the far right who actually tanked her nomination. She was kind of a little bit of a dip anyway. So Democrats were like, "Well, is she really qualified?" But like the actual hard right people were like, "We want a fucking hard right person." And then who got into the Harriet Miers? You got Sam Alito. So good job, liberals. You played yourself.
As we sometimes do. Speaking of one Sam Alito, there's been a recent slate of scandals, I guess would kindly put it, as a byproduct of his wife displaying a Stop the Steal flag outside of his house, and this has led for calls for him to recuse himself. His impartiality has been in question. What are your thoughts? I guess a broader question I would have is, let me try it a different way. Would an ethics guideline have prevented or addressed anything related to Alito or Thomas's most recent scandals?
It depends on the guidelines. So the Supreme Court's like, for lower courts, they have mechanisms to enforce against one another. For the Supreme Court, there's technically no binding code of ethics. We just left them to their own devices. We could impose a binding code of ethics that would essentially have the Supreme Court accountable to like a panel of lower court judges who would probably decide on them. And you could have one that would like force his recusal and then replace him with other stuff, or strip his jurisdiction for that given case, or a variety of other things that you could do to like keep him away from stuff he's clearly compromised on, like election and January 6th related stuff after flying January 6th affinity flags.
I think Congress was trying to take some steps hell, I actually think Biden was back in this, to impose an enforceable code of ethics. And I recently remember Ketanji Brown Jackson coming out in favor of that, but it has next to no chance of actually happening. It's scary to think that 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the road, the future United States gets to look back at this moment of really just major ethics scandals. And the flag is the least of it. There's what is arguable bribery happening with Justice Thomas.
Arguable?
Well, I'm giving
not by their definitions. I'll have you know.
I thought there was a recent court case where they weakened the definition of bribery, right?
Yeah, that's why I was joking about that. Well, come on, it's not a bribery. It's a
gratuity, right?
It's a gratuity. Yeah. You're like, well, it's not a bribery. It's a gratuity. It's like, well, yeah, but that statute is so funny. If you read that statute in that case, it says like payment for doing an action or a reward for doing an action. So basically, they put it like if you received a gift for doing an action either before or after in excess of this amount. It was like $5,000. It was like a lot. It was like a lot of money. And like, well, if you receive a gift before or after doing this, that constitutes like bribery or whatever. And they're like, well, come on, that wasn't a bribe because it occurred after the fact. It was a gift for like services rendered.
They seem to have this standard that unless like the check says bribe for rolling my way, it's like it's not
pro quo.
Yes, which seems like absurdly high. Well, obviously, criminal intent's not going to work like that. Nobody's just going to announce their intent to bribe.
Why would Clarence Thomas have a line so high? Why? What could there, what like a good faith, reading of the law and the Constitution could make one think that it needs to be so high? Or is it that he's accepted $4 million in gifts during his tenure on the bench?
Well, speaking of good faith reading of Constitution and law, is there anywhere in the Constitution or in prior law that's ever actually dealt with something like this? A Supreme Court justice receiving gifts to the tunes of millions of dollars without disclosing them?
Sort of. There was Justice. I'm forgetting his name. Basically Nixon. It's the 1970s. I should remember it. He was pitched as like the successor to Earl Warren. It's got a funny name. Hold on, let me look it up real quick. Anyway, it was
the final.
Oh my god, not the final. Let's see. Timeline. It is.
You're killing me, man. You're killing me.
I'm losing here. There's only so many names on this.
Just tell us what it is. We don't need the name. Just tell us.
Oh, it's Abe Fortas. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's Abe Fortas. So
Abe Fortas. Yeah, I was gonna say that, but
Yeah. He was on that. He was only on the court for 4 years. That's why I couldn't find him. I have this like a timeline of people for the whole Warren Court. He was only on there for 4 years and he retired. I think
that Warren Court was good.
He took like a paid teaching gig or something like that, or like he expected. He took like a payment for speaking at like a university, and Nixon's like, I'm going to like imprison your wife or something if you don't resign. Like, it was really funny because Nixon wanted to pack the court pursuant to his get that asshole I mentioned before on the court, Lewis Powell.
The great here's a thought experiment that's fun to have fun with. What would Trump v. Nixon? I'm sorry. What would Trump v. Nixon? What would United States v. Nixon look like under a Roberts court? Because they've ruled like some presumptive immunity for presidents, right, already.
Yeah, so if he, I think there might still be problems with that because he ordered private people to do it pursuant to his campaign. If he just told the FBI to do Watergate, he would have been fine. So, like, ironically, if you just made it worse, he would be covered. Yeah, so that immunity ruling basically says like criminal immunity for all things related to core presidential responsibilities, which they include but
they don't define that though, right?
Well, they say anything that stems from like core functions, which is like pardoning, control of the armed forces, and they also include like I think it was the take care clause or something. I think it's the take care clause.
I remember there's a recording from Richard Nixon where he's talking to one of his deputies, somebody in his staff, that he's basically dangling a pardon in front of them as a means of obstructing justice. Would this new ruling have allowed that if a pardon falls within his core responsibilities as president?
It would. So I think there's maybe some argument for like other stuff related to the pardon. Particularly, what you said was someone in his cabinet.
Man,
If it was someone in his cabinet, then
if I'd have known we were talking about Nixon.
Sorry, yeah. If it was someone in his cabinet, the answer would be no. You couldn't use anything because the president and his conversations with his cabinet members would be official conduct pursuant to like his office, and use of the pardon for any reason would also be pursuant to like a core power of the executive. So that would all no. You couldn't do anything about that. If he was trying to sell a pardon to like a private person, maybe there's something with that being like. Maybe around the private conduct and the conversations related to that, you might be able to do. It would be very, very hard to prove the bribery, though, because you can't actually use the official act of the pardon. So you just say, like, he received all this money.
It's not a bribery. It's a gift.
And then you just kind of end the sentence.
Gratuity.
Like, yeah, he received all this money, and did he do anything? They're like, I don't know. Like, they're not allowed to use it as evidence as part of that ruling. They can't even use they can't use official acts as evidence. Of other crimes
which
that were non-official either.
There's a crime fraud exception, like when people talk to their lawyers. I don't know why it's different so this applied to Trump. So really, the Supreme Court threw Trump a lifeline when they should have thrown him a rope, right, to hang himself with.
Yeah.
What they said was that a president's conversations with his attorney general would fall under such presumptions. But one of the evidence that was being used against Trump was a memo he wrote to his attorney general, his acting attorney general. It says, just declare that the election was fraudulent and my allies in Congress will handle the rest.
Mm.
I don't see how the court, in any reasonable way, maintains the integrity it has in light of such a ruling. This seems egregious. This is what judicial activism is. I don't see anywhere in the Constitution where it gives the president this kind of power. This seems to have been invented whole cloth.
Or it gives him the power to direct his attorney. No, I would actually argue the Constitution says the opposite, in fact. They're arguing there's a presumptive like presidential immunity for core powers, and there's maybe like the smallest element of that is true. Like you could make it Congress could not craft a law that says it's illegal for the president to pardon somebody who we convicted of a crime or something, right? Because like his core power is to pardon for federal crimes, right? So Congress could not encroach upon his constitutional power in that manner, right? But every other fucking crime is not included. In fact, if you read, it's in Article 3 and Article 1, I think. So basically, when you read those two in conjunction, they're talking about impeachment. So one of them mentions that, I think it's Article 1 says, executive officials can be impeached in the House and then tried in the Senate. And the impeachment will not have any effect on whether they can be like charged for crimes or not. So it says like any executive officer who could face impeachment is still subject to like criminal penalties after impeachment. It basically says that like in conjunction when you read it. So it's like how the fuck they're telling you that they can still be tried criminally, and everyone operated under the assumption that the president can be tried for crimes that he did while in office. And up until this fucking ruling,
up until this,
yeah. It's you don't get many explicit things in the Constitution, you know. That's kind of one of them. You have to get it from two areas, but one of them basically says like, upon conviction, they will be like removed from office, and here's who can be removed, and it's like all impeachable officials can remove. All heads of departments, or I can't remember exactly what it says. Executive officials can be like impeached and removed from office, and then upon removal, they can be like charged for crimes.
Do you remember when John Roberts was at his confirmation hearing in like the mid-2000s? He was talking about his vision for a future court as he was seeking the position of Chief Justice. He was talking about a court that was more judicially restrained because the big conservative meme for forever has been all the judicial activism on the court. They're making laws and yada, yada, yada. If you look at his legacy, right, in light of what he said to get the position he has, it doesn't seem like his legacy is going to be well reflected in the history. Like, we're fast forward 30 years in the future, I don't think this ruling is more of a stain on the Roberts court.
Everything you need to know about like John Roberts is that he worked on the Bush v. Gore. He was a lawyer in Bush v. Gore. Great
case.
He's in the tank for Republicans. He wrote. If you go back, I believe he wrote a memo for when he was clerking for like either an appellate judge or a Supreme Court judge So it's basically he wrote a memo outlining how the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act is like wrong and should be like gotten rid of.
Oh, he already did that. Yeah. Well, he got his wish, right? In the Shelby County case.
He got to enact his vision. Yeah,
an oddly interesting case because the court once again they don't. It is judicial activism. Congress passed a law, and they basically said, "Yeah, we know Congress passed a law, but times are different, and we don't feel like it." Right? There doesn't seem to really be.
Actually, it's even worse than that. So, like the line from that is the Shelby County Beholder. What they overrode was the Voting Rights Act had a pre-clearance provision, right? And Section 2 of it gives you the formula to determine what states are covered. And included in that
the formula was outdated.
Yeah, but it's like, who are you to say that?
Yeah, how do you determine that?
And he said his reasoning was it undermines the equal sovereignty among the states, the constitutional principle of equal sovereignty among the states. Now, I don't know if you've ever Control F the Constitution. You can't find that in the Constitution. The first time you find that is in the equal sovereignty, that like a congressional thing cannot discriminate against one state over another. That they have like some sort of like that you can't treat them differently because like some are doing racism and some aren't. Now, I would agree in part where I think we should just remove the pre-clearance and do it to everywhere. All election laws should be subject to scrutiny and overview to make sure they're not unduly discriminatory towards a given group when we're changing election laws. But I mean, Congress didn't do it like that, so whatever. But they chose to get rid of the whole provision, which means like you can't actually review any of the laws of states that are practicing discriminatory stuff like that. And literally the day after that opinion dropped. I think it's like Texas, Georgia, Florida, Louisiana,
North Carolina. They immediately start like laws that.
So hold on, just be like, when I say the next day, that's not hyperbole.
No, it was the next day. Literal, absolute next day. Literal. I remember this.
I mean, for when you upload this, I want people to realize that's not hyperbole on my part. That is a literal statement of the ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Commission, gave all these fucking cunts like pre-written legislative shit to like enact a. What's it called? Voter ID laws and various other stuff that would make it harder for Democratic population, typically Democratic voting populations to vote.
Well, typically minorities is who has been directed to.
Yeah, mostly minorities.
And the irony of it is, the statement from the Roberts Court was we're in different times, right? That we don't need these laws anymore because we don't have. In fact, I even think this was a question like, oh my God, Scalia asked this question during like the oral arguments, something to the effect of, do you think southern states are just more racist? Which is like kind of a tell, right? Because immediately after this ruling happens, it is the southern states that basically reenact these laws.
And some of the basically every state that had like a trifecta in 2014 was a whole lot of swing states too. So like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, all did stuff like that too. That's why if you look at the clearance map, parts of Wisconsin are covered, and I think Michigan too, maybe. Because like you had like really racist areas, like white people trying to make it so black people couldn't vote as they moved there during like the Rust Belt shit. I mean, some people may know this, but the second resurgence of the Klan that occurred in like the 1970 to like the 1930s, that was largely in like the Midwest.
Thanks Hollywood.
Not the South. Yeah.
But this does kind of speak to the thesis earlier, the conspiracy about the remaking of the courts, because it's hard to ignore that for basically the last 40 years, the Supreme Court has consistently issued rulings that have sided with conservative causes. You have Citizens United siding with conservative causes. You have Bush v. Gore. You've got Shelby County v. Holder. You've got Dobbs v. Jackson Women Health. Like on these major issues where the court has looked at some issue where precedent has gone away from conservatives, they've reversed it to say that actually the Constitution in a plain text reading, which plain text reading would value a black guy as 3/5 of a person, but whatever, plain text reading of it actually favors all these conservative causes. Stare decisis seems to be meaningless to this court.
Yeah, no, that's correct. They don't give a shit. I mean, Thomas has openly said he doesn't care about like there's a regular like Thomas concurrence where he's like, well, I agree with the court's reasoning, but I would also like completely get rid of this precedent. Like he doesn't care about stare decisis, and the rest of the court's with him. Like stare decisis is something that's like a form of like judicial restraint and to like put stability into the law. And this court is not conservative; it's fundamentally reactionary. They want to drag us backwards from whence we came. You know,
and irony to that because Roberts was supposed to be one that remade the court to be judicially restrained.
Yeah, I mean that's just a lie that conservatives have told. Like, not to be like that, like lefty asshole or whatever, but like
by all means,
that's
be a
all. That's
lefty
always
asshole.
been that's always been like the lie and the bullshit they go under. Like, we want to get rid of the activism of the Warren Court, right? I mentioned the counterpoint server before. I remember I was just making fun of one of them on it, like, oh, you don't like the liberal like court activism.
Ironically, the court with the biggest expansion
of
liberty for American citizens since ever, right?
Yeah, well, when you get to stuff like that, right? Like, what are these activists like? They'll only refer to it in an abstraction because when you get to the specifics, Americans love it. Like, you know what that is? Your Miranda rights.
Yeah, it's Miranda.
That's from the Warren Court. the MAP exclusionary rule, which is when the cops violate your rights to get evidence that they can't use it against you because they violated your rights. That's the MAP exclusionary rule. That's a Warren Court thing. There's so fucking many more. Brown v. Board of Education. That was a Warren Court thing. That you actually can't reconcile that with originalism either, because there were segregated schools at the time that the 14th Amendment came down. So Brown v. Board cannot be reconciled under originalism. They just mulligan it because they can't. They don't want to say it's wrong, but fucking it's clown shit.
It might not be necessarily bad to say it's wrong in the first place. If activism is let's look at the concept of liberty, right, and how judicial interpretations of liberty have changed over time.
Oh fuck! You're right to an attorney too. Gideon yes, Wainwright. That was also the Warren Court. Yeah.
Yeah. What is that? Sixth Amendment is like
you don't have the right to an attorney.
No, they would say you have a right to an attorney. You just got to buy it yourself.
Yeah. You just have to buy it yourself. Oh, okay. Like, you want to talk about our system is like, and if you have money, you can get away with everything. Like, you're facing literal fucking prison time, and you don't get a lawyer. I think honestly, you should have a right to counsel for literally everything. The only thing I'd say is if the government's involved on one side of the litigation, the person on the other side should have the right to a government appointed lawyer for sure. Everything. I don't care if it's a civil thing. I don't care if they're taking your fucking kid. I don't care if like they're suing you for like back taxes. Every single thing that the government's on one side of it, they should provide you a lawyer if you can't afford one. Every single one of
them. I don't disagree. This gets to the question I was trying to ask earlier about how our understanding of liberty, you know, in a judicial context has shifted from a time when people were considered property, right? Dred Scott was pretty explicit that, like, hey, the Constitution is even talking about these people. Women used to... I'll give an example of the shift that I've seen that has done nothing but piss conservatives off. You had... It wasn't Griswold. What was the case before Griswold? One of these cases says that people have a privacy right to their own bedrooms, and it's for married couples who can determine if they want to have kids. And then that snowballs into actually everybody can determine if they want to have kids. Everybody has a right to contraception, and then snowballed to Roe, which is you have a right to privacy. You can't be made to give birth against your will. Every single step of this way, as liberty has expanded for individuals so that they can make more decisions about their personal lives without the state intervening, conservatives have been saying that's activist. It shouldn't be that way.
Yeah, no, that's correct. Most things we look back like positively, particularly in court jurisprudence, like come from the Warren Court, and then ever since then we have like this slow erosion. Ever since conservatives under Nixon got control of the court, you had the failure to expand stuff. So, for example, the Bivens is a case that allows you to sue federal agents when they violate your rights, you know, for money, because like you already had the exclusion rule that says they can't use the evidence, but it lets them like sue you for money. So ever since that case, if conservatives took over the court shortly after that, and they basically refused to ever expand Bivens again. They're like, oh, that's a different context. They just distinguish to the point of never expanding it ever. So unless you were Mr. Bivens in the 1970s, you're never going to be able to sue for federal agents violating your rights. But they haven't technically overturned it. They just limit your rights and your freedoms through a bunch of like technical bullshit, and distinguishing. So they act like they're not overturning precedent when they are. I don't know if that. Sorry.
Well, no, they seem to embrace that. Like Alito's opinion in Dobbs was like Roe was wrong. Period. And I've heard this. You've probably heard the same refrain that the court overturns case law all the time when they get it wrong. Right? Brown v. Board overturned Plessy v. Ferguson, for example. Right.
So the idea of stare decisis is that to overturn something, that stability is important and having consistency with your decisions is important. For them to come back and overturn something, it has to be like very, very wrong. So like obviously Brown v. Board of Education is like a overturning of Plessy v. Ferguson, which is, you know, unequivocally like a good thing. So oftentimes when you see us overturning those precedents, it tends to be when it was something that was diminutive towards a group of people that we then said, no, we're not doing that anymore. This is like the first time we've like done that while stripping rights from people.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the concern, right? Because these rights were only recognized. There's rights are not explicit in the Constitution. They're penumbras, right? That's what the court says. You have penumbra rights, but if those penumbra rights include abortion,
just to clarify for the handful of people who listen, so a penumbral right is basically this. You get it from like the 14th Amendment. So you have like your due process rights, and from your due process, they say like, well, that involves like the government providing you a specific process to redeem your rights, and then from that, there's also like this thing that the government's just not allowed to do, because to even like try and do something would be a violation of your rights. And they sort of use like other rights that we understand to infer like these penumbral rights. Penumbral meaning shadows. So like rights that exist like in the shadow of other rights. So that's where you get your right to privacy from. There's no right to privacy in the Constitution. They view that as implied through like the Fourth Amendment requirement for warrants and other stuff like that. But yeah, I think that's a very holistic and good understanding of how to expand rights, doing some like literally like reasoned judging, right? And the current court just rejects any sort of like careful analysis. They don't, or sorry, debate of that manner of saying like, well, what does it mean to have rights? Where does the government not really have an interest here, and where can they just not step because there's no good reason for them to do so? Or if they're going to step, they need to have a goddamn good reason. And that's where your like the penumbra rights and stuff like sort of come from. Sorry, then I got a little off topic.
To think I've never went to law school.
It's important to understand that, because like I think the concept of penumbral rights and substantive due process are something that should underpin or the Ninth Amendment analysis, which no one really does, but
we should.
Yeah, the Ninth Amendment is not as
kind of there.
Tell you, it exists, and it exists for a reason. So the Ninth Amendment basically says, like, hey, this is not an exhaustive list. You have other rights we just forgot to mention here.
We didn't write it all down. Figure it out.
Yeah, and they did it specifically because there were people at the founding who were not comfortable with the idea of it being an exhaustive list. Like, tell you what, we'll do some stuff explicitly, and we'll throw this catch-all so we can like figure it out later on, which I think is smart, and it's just been ignored because like, what does that mean? And I think we sort of got that through. The Warren Court in particular developed substantive due process, which is this idea of you claim a life, liberty, or property interest. And the court just kind of says, like, well, what is the nature of that interest, right? Like, does the Constitution say you have the right to raise your kids how you want? Do you feel it's a fundamental right for if you have kids, you get to raise your kids how you want? Do you get to put them in the religion you want, the schools they go to, what you feed them? Do you think does that sound like a fundamental right to you? If I just take your kid, is that a deprivation of your rights? Should that be subject to something?
I mean, that might be a liberty right, right?
Well, in the Constitution, it ain't fucking there.
You would say it's penumbral.
Exactly, yeah. We have developed that over time as an extension of your right to privacy, of you having the ability to raise your family as you see fit. That's a right we have come to understand over time, and we take for granted. Like, the government tomorrow said, like, oh, by the way, we're taking your kids and we're putting them in, like, an indoctrination camp. Most people would be very upset by that. And that's why we get, like, people, like, go to private schools, all this other bullshit. But that's the thing that we understand. That's penumbral. That is not in the Constitution. That is an extension of your privacy rights, your ability to like raise your family as you see fit, to do what you want within your own household. That we've used extensions of that.
The worry. Well, my worry. I can't speak to other people's worries. It's definitely not conservative worry, but the worry we have is liberty erosion creep, right? That as one penumbral right goes down, you're going to have a domino effect of other penumbral rights that are all derived from the same understanding of the constitutional processes before. If the Roberts Court rejects these because they are fundamentally reactive, and they overturn what the Warren Court has established, precedent starts moving in the opposite direction of what we want. Liberty is no longer being expansive; it's being retractive.
Yeah, the abortion thing is actually a good example of that in certain ways, right? So overturning of Roe. You might be familiar with this, but the whole Comstock Act, which is from like the 1870s or something, and it basically bans the transportation of anything that can facilitate immoral acts, such as like abortion or something like that. It was the Trump plan is like they're never going to get something like through Congress, most likely, to ban abortion.
They're just on the books.
Yeah, they're going to revive this dated Comstock Act thing, and their interpretation of it is actually even more barbaric than it was in 1870. Like how they're trying to use it. So not only is it going backwards from protections, they're using old laws in a way that they weren't even originally used, those laws tended to have like some implied like exception for right of the mother. Like it was very balanced towards like let's not like kill women and stuff like that, right? It was meant to just like try and have like less abortions. The way that we've seen abortion laws like anti-abortion laws enacted across the country has been like with a flippant disregard for women's health and well-being. Something that the Comstock Act would not have, from my understanding, its place in time did not allow for that. But it's like,
most of them
operated
on a switch, right? They had trigger laws going into effect. The second Roe was overturned, and these were trigger laws were written over 50 years ago, right? They're like. They're from a time when marital rape was legal.
I would be surprised if trigger laws are 50 years old. I thought a lot of them like gained popularity in like the 2000s and stuff when you really had the abortion movement coalescing, like where you had like the spate of abortion clinic violence, right? Where you had like the firebombing of abortion clinics, which still happens today, but not
George Tiller, the baby killer stuff.
Yes,
20 years ago.
As well.
20 years.
Yes, my understanding is that's when most of them popped up, but it doesn't really matter, right? I mean, the point is they wrote them as taking effect when Roe gets overturned, and then Roe was overturned, and here we are.
The way in which Roe was overturned is highly suspect because the people who were nominated to the court, such as Brett Kavanaugh, such as Neil Gorsuch, seem to have misled Congress people who were talking to them about the prospects of overturning this. And they seem to say this is established law and this is set. And then they just completely flip the board over on us. This hasn't worked out for states. We have this federalist system where states are immediately starting to enact their laws that they do. And you have a cascade of issues where women, they don't have the same liberty rights they do. They are bound by a state to give birth against their will because doctors will not perform an abortion that might be medically necessary. We've allowed such a situation where the state can interfere in the medical decisions of a person, right? I don't see a way we reform past this without packing the court, or because we're still waiting for Clarence Thomas's old ass to die.
Or establishing. Joe Biden should use some of that
presidential immunity
they gave him, and
we'll just hire a better.
He should open up six seats on that court. You know,
I should not make a joke. I was gonna make a Trump assassination joke. I shouldn't do that. That would be important.
I'm not above that.
You're not above that. I'm trying.
I made like 9 different assassination jokes. By a friend, a law classmate of mine. She was like kind of getting stalked by some guys. Like, yo, maybe you can get him to go like full. Lee Harvey Oswald? No, that's the wrong one. Like,
the guy who
you can be the Jodie Foster. No.
Oh, you're talking about the taxi driver guy. I know who you're talking about.
The 3-name guy. He's like, I need to impress
Jodie
Foster.
What the fuck is that guy's name?
So he shot Reagan. Yeah. John Hinckley Jr.
John Hinckley Jr. Yes. Didn't he freed recently?
Yeah, they let him out. They should let him out a long time ago. But yeah, they let him out like several years ago.
That was nice of him.
Yeah, it's a shame he missed.
He didn't miss.
Well, yeah, he did that. Well, he didn't hit the right spot. He didn't hit it hard enough. Yeah.
Look, he's a better shooter than the last 2 guys. That's what we'll say. We gotta stop. This is just horrible.
That's true.
We're going to hell.
Listen. Reactionary is getting becoming non-problematic.
Look, if abortion is murder, I'm gonna make this fucking joke, right? If you're gonna say a woman who's like bleeding out, she's a fucking murderer because she gotta get a fucking abortion. Fuck it. You know what?
I'm just supporting the exercising of our Second Amendment rights.
There you go.
To make this a more free country.
I always heard it was there to
the tree of liberty is looking thirsty.
It was there to address a tyrannical government. And you know what? The last 2 assassination attempts were against a guy who said he wants to be dictator on day 1.
So, I'm just happy no one's back down from calling him an authoritarian and a fascist when they're just crying like little bitches about it.
Yeah, he acts like a fascist.
Small whisper of that. Because he totally fucking is. That's why.
So J.D. Vance made the same shit after the second attempt. That this is the Democrats who need to turn down the rhetoric, which we're definitely not helping that right now, because they keep calling him a fascist and a threat to democracy. So as a byproduct of that, people are going to take matters into their own hands. Motherfucker, he says he wants to be a dictator on day 1. He says we should suspend the Constitution. The guy acts like a fascist. Actually, we were talking about that just before we were recording. That's funny how that segued into that. We kind of got off constitutional issues. Do you want to get back onto constitutional issues?
Yeah, that's fine. I love talking about Constitution stuff.
Or do you want to talk about how Trump's a fascist and we can talk about politics?
Well, we could. I how to reform the court. There are plenty of ways that we could do it. The problem is everything is sort of subject to the Supreme Court could just say like that law is unconstitutional, and the problem is Congress. Joe Biden missed a fucking window in like in the beginning of his term to like do Supreme Court reform because it needed to happen, but that was just not a thing he really prioritized. He's some bullshit like commission, whatever.
It's probably not going to happen under a Harris administration.
And the court, I don't think so. Sorry. I think it's more likely if they have like all three branches. The problem is like you're not going to get They couldn't get through the filibuster with Manchin and Sinema, and you would need to get through the filibuster to do that in like voting rights legislation. And you have to know that any voting rights legislation you do will not survive this current Supreme Court because they are fascist reactionary freaks. You know, like they're going to destroy whatever you do, saying like, oh, that's that's violating the states' rights to conduct their elections however they want, and say that black people aren't allowed to vote or whatever.
You remember that recent court case that argued that states do have the right to appoint their electors, such that even if one candidate loses the election, the state legislature can appoint the electors how they see fit?
It's Moore v. Harper, I think.
Yeah, that one, Moore v. Harper. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Why did the court turn that down? I remember them rejecting these arguments, but it was like scary how close they were to approving them, and I don't remember it being like a clean 8 or 9-0.
So that came up as a byproduct of Chief Justice Rehnquist's opinion in Bush v. Gore.
Good, that case.
He's the one who first threw out that idea that like if because the Florida legislature in Bush v. Gore was already considering like, listen, fuck the Florida Supreme Court. If they just try and make us like count ballots and determine an actual winner, and if it's not Bush, we're just gonna directly, pass a bill and give our votes directly to Bush, and we're gonna bypass this recount bullshit. And I believe that passed in the House already, and the Senate just never voted on it, and obviously never went to Jeb Bush, so it didn't get that far. But Rehnquist basically said like they would have the right to do that. Let me check real quick. Sorry, it's been a while since I looked at the Moore v. Harper thing.
No, but it does speak to a trend I observe where that power tends to trend towards Republicans. Even in like the 2000s, the Florida Supreme Court is saying you need to recount every vote. You need to make sure these votes are counted. The legislature was just like, fuck the votes. And they arguably would have just gotten away with it. The Florida Supreme Court was overturned by a Republican Supreme Court on the federal level, and they just got away with it. They consistently just get away with it.
Yeah, that led you not having to deal with the Florida legislature problem because the Supreme Court just gave the election to Bush instead. And Bush could have kept going. Sorry, Gore could have kept going, but he didn't. But whatever.
Well, what would he have kept going on? Like uniform counting standards?
Yeah, so one of the issue was having different standards for counting votes throughout the state, that was one of their claimed problems. So what you could do is request a recount for the entire state. And the court basically made this artificial deadline. You probably heard of the what's it called? The safe harbor provision or safe harbor deadline. The Supreme Court used it as a pretextual justification to say like there wasn't enough time to redo the counting, but the safe harbor provision doesn't really mean anything. It's just something that happens in like early December, and it's just like a sort of a worthless promise that like, hey, if you get your certified votes to Congress by this time, we'll like really count them seriously.
But like as we know, the electors are supposed to be counting, right?
Well, the safe harbor provision is in December. The electors are counted on January 6th, so it's about a month before the electoral votes actually get counted. They're just saying you have to have it before then.
No, the electors' votes were certified on January 6th. The electors count their votes, I thought, in December. This is a stupid fucking system. Thanks a lot, Founding Fathers.
Yeah, I'm not going to say you're wrong. I thought they count them on January 6th, but they submit the certified slates. Well, I guess whenever they certify them, they just have to have them to Congress by that safe harbor provision. But technically, you could just have them there before January 6th. It doesn't matter. And they can count whatever they want. Because, like, as we know, it didn't, like, I think the only state that missed the safe harbor provision was Wisconsin in 2020. They missed it by, like, a day or two. Because, once again, it doesn't matter. And Republicans challenged, Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and maybe Wisconsin too. I think they challenged all four of them, but three of them hit the safe harbor deadline, so it means nothing. Like it's just sort of like an empty promise by Congress, but the Supreme Court used it as a pretext to say, like, well, listen, we stopped the recount, but now you don't have time to restart it by the safe harbor provision. And it's like,
why did they stop the recount? Why couldn't they just do the hearing while the recount was going?
Well, the answer is really obvious, isn't it?
Oh yeah, never mind. Yeah, the answer is really obvious.
The answer is if you keep going with the recount and Gore gets ahead and then you stop it, then Gore wins. That's the problem.
Yeah, I was talking to our good friend Deej about that very problem, where he was kind of under this assumption that, well, Gore never really got ahead, so it doesn't really matter that the recount was stopped. And it's like there was a trajectory going on.
That was in fact the point.
And that was the point that Gore was arguing. Why aren't we counting every vote? And this is the thing about uniform counting standards. Okay, so I'm relitigating this. You can't have uniform counting standards. You can't. Not every county works the same way. Not all of them have the same design for their ballots. So the butterfly ballot was one issue. Not every county has the same voting machines. It differs from place to place to place to place. It seems unreasonable. The only true equal protection violation is not counting all votes.
Yeah, and I'm not the first person to make this observation, so but I can see the argument of having like a different counting standard not being fair in a certain way, right? But if we accept that, you basically have to throw out like 150 years of elections. Ever since we had popular vote elections, you've had different cities, different counties within different states, and different states running their elections in different ways with different people on the ballots, and there's a million fucking problems. Like if you want to say like everyone needs to have their votes counted the same way, and like, well, we've never done that before. This is a new thing that you're saying. If you're saying, well, that's unfair, like, well, we haven't done that until now, and that's still not true because we don't have them uniform across various states. We only have them uniform within states. So what?
We realistically can't.
Yeah, and it's just stupid. Like the point should be to interpret the intent of the voter as like liberally as you can in regards to that. And actually, I learned this recently because I took a Florida election law class. I talked extensively about Bush v. Gore. So I learned the reason why when they recounted the votes with the machines. Do you know why it added to it? It added to Bush's. It reduced Bush's lead from like 2,500 to like 800 or something. Do you know why that happened?
When you cycle the ballot through the machine, the hanging chad would get folded back up into place so that the scanner couldn't read the ballot.
No, it's the opposite. So the chads would be loose. But the reason why it benefit Gore more, I'll remove the rhetorical question, just explain it, because I thought it was kind of interesting.
I'm sorry. Go for it.
Yeah, I understand. So obviously Democratic areas tend to be larger cities. So they literally used a punch card system, like a hole punch. They use a hole punch. When you hole punch a whole lot, it gets full. And at a certain point, it's just sort of like when you go to punch it, it won't punch all the way through the paper. Dimples. So they keep hanging a little bit. Yeah. You can have a dimple chad, you can have hanging chads. So when you had these ones that were loose, like the punch was actually physically loose, when they ran through the ballots again, once they've actually cleaned everything the fuck out, just by cycling through the physical machine, just moving it actually just knocked the chads out, so they could actually be counted, like the intended vote could be counted. And that was more prevalent in Democratic counties because they have higher voting density, so their punch machines would get filled up more. It would be more likely their voting machines would get filled up than ones in Republican districts. So that's why that happened, and that's why when they did like the machine recounts, which don't typically change anything, and that it did, and it's because of that shaky bullshit. It's so stupid. It's such a giant train wreck. It's very funny.
How old were you when Bush v. Gore happened?
I'm 34. I was like,
so you were 10
or 11.
10 or 11. Okay, what a fucking shit show that was.
Yeah, remember this in November, so yeah, my birthday occurred during the middle of their recount insanity.
I tell my students that the world was on a very, 9/11 permanently changed the trajectory of, the 1990s, but really it kind of started a little earlier than that. It was Bush v. Gore really kind of set us on the course. If you don't have Bush v. Gore, and you let the Florida Supreme Court ruling stands, there's a whole cavalcade of legal fuckery that arguably could be avoided. Like the very first one, hell, I don't even know what the War on Terror's got a number, but the first one that came to my mind immediately was Citizens United, which, again, seems to overturn years of prior precedent that limits the amount of financial contributions which could be anonymously donated to any campaign in a presidential election, where you had the McCain-Feingold Act putting a hard cap on... you just didn't have super PACs, right? Like the super PAC craze didn't exist until the Supreme Court basically lifted this protections for money influencing politics, right? How much airspace can you buy, which is a finite resource. Airspace itself is a finite resource. Ad space is a finite resource. All of this stuff is going to be biased towards those with the most resources, right? And those with the most...
You and I... Are you saying that the law is not fair, even though you and I equally have the right to Jeff Bezos to purchase $1 billion in advertising.
Yeah, we all have the right to purchase $1 billion in advertising. The actual case itself represents an interesting First Amendment case, which was, can you put out a video or a movie? I don't remember. It's can you put out a movie just like a month or so before the election, right?
Yeah. So the part of those laws were if you're doing like political spending, well, you can have independent spending committees that you can't run. You can't run an advertisement within like 30 days of a general or 6 days of a primary or vice versa, something like that. And so Citizens United was just arguing, hey, I don't know if I ever ranted you out. Citizens United pisses me off on like multiple levels. It demonstrates like how the court is a super legislature. Citizens United pisses me off at multiple levels. Okay. So I think it's a quintessential example of how the court is essentially a super legislature. So we're going to go back slightly. Sorry. So Article 3 of the Constitution is what establishes the Supreme Court. And it says the court can see cases and controversies that are brought before it. And that's where we get like standing principles from. Which is like, hey, you need to have like a thing before the court. The court's supposed to decide issues before. It's not supposed to go searching for issues. And then in like the 1920s, so the court used to have to hear any case appealed to it. But in like the 1920s or 30s, somewhere around then, we gave the court discretion over its docket. So it was discretionary appeals. They didn't really have to hear anything that they didn't want to hear. So they got to choose cases from below. So it's not just everything brought to them. It's that the cases they want to choose from below they take. So now they're taking issues that they want to hear. So it's not just like any other court. Oh, it's about to get worse.
Okay.
So they don't just take cases, they take questions from cases. So you might appeal 7 different issues from a case to the Supreme Court, but they don't hear all those issues. They choose the one they want. So from the case, you're not hearing a case, you're hearing a fraction of a case. And Citizens United is one of the cases that takes this to another level, because not only did they take a question from a lower court, they then didn't like the question and rewrote the question. So, hold on, let me get this straight. You get to choose the own cases that get brought before you, and then when you choose the cases brought before you, you can choose the questions from those cases. And then if those questions aren't even right, you can actually rewrite them and essentially ask yourself the own question that you're then going to answer.
How was the Citizens United question rewritten?
It's a good question. So back to the Citizens United thing. So all Citizens United wanted was for them to be declared a bona fide film studio, similar to like Michael Moore, so that they could publish their shit within an election window. Because Michael Moore published like Fahrenheit 9/11 or whatever the hell it's called.
You almost said 451. I do that a lot too.
Yeah, Fahrenheit like 9/11. Wait, is it 451 or 9/11? I don't even know.
Fahrenheit 451 is the book. Fahrenheit 9/11 is the movie. Yes.
Got it. Yeah. So he published that within that window, and they're like, well, yeah, but he's just an actual like movie producer. But Citizens United was trying to publish their shit on like, you know, that old like direct, like you could watch movies on cable, like you'd go with your old fucking remote, you like could go to the movie channel. They wanted to put Hillary the movie on there for free. So they weren't trying to actually sell a product through like a studio. They were trying to like say we're a studio, but then like give your movie for free through these cable streaming services. Like, dude, you're doing political propaganda. Like, what are you talking about here? And also, he's like David Bossie is the guy. Citizens United is like a political. He worked for, like the H.W. Bush campaign and shit. He's a long time like political like operative guy or whatever. Like, it's very transparent that he was a political operative and not a film person. But whatever.
So to be fair, wouldn't if you are putting it on the airwaves? Let me rephrase this. Even if it is political propaganda is a First Amendment right. Right. I think this was the destiny argument that Citizens United, well, this was also the Supreme Court, right? That the right to put this video out many months before the election, even if it does represent a form of political propaganda, itself was First Amendment protected. Or was that what destiny argued?
So I think that money in politics should be considered like a time, place, and manner restriction, which is subject to that the government can put more restrictions on it because you're not regulating the content of speech, you're regulating the mode and the time and the manner in which it can be done. So those previous ones were saying, hey, you can't do it 30, 60 days before because that's like overly influential on the results of an election. You can do it beforehand, or you can do it within like the normal donation limits of it that anyone else could, right? So that was the idea behind like how we're going to like restrict the limit of PACs that we otherwise authorize. Because you're not saying what you can or can't say, you're just saying the time and place in which you can say it. And given that their super ability to donate, like you and I are limited to how much we can donate to a given political candidate. Like I think it's like $3,000 each a year or something like that per candidate per election cycle. But But PACs are not limited; they can just take unlimited sums of money. So because of that, they're restricting how they can transmit. The time, place, and manner in which they can do it. And generally, when you're not regulating the content of speech itself, that's subject to lower protections, even if it is political speech in nature. So that's sort of the basis on which you can tell them, like, I'm not regulating your message, just regulating what you can say. So I think it's totally fine to regulate speech in that fucking manner, and that's how it existed before the court overturned it in Citizens United. But anyway, to finish the speed run, the slowest speed run of all time of Citizens United. So Citizens United just asked, like, hey, tell the Federal Election Commission they categorize this wrong. We're a bona fide film studio. We can publish this whenever the fuck we want.
They went a little bit more expansive with their ruling.
This is where it gets even dirtier, right? So they wrote their initial ruling saying, like, oh yeah, Citizens United is a bona fide film studio. FEC, fuck off. But then they saw the swing justice was Anthony Kennedy, and Anthony Kennedy's opinion, he's like a crazy libertarian. He's the worst. He's so annoying. But he wrote this freewheeling, like, this is like the embodiment of everything we need to give, like absolute free speech, and corporations should not be restricted from their donation. And they're like, wait, hold on, like, Kennedy, you want this as a majority opinion? So they already decided that we're going to back the Kennedy opinion as the majority opinion, but it doesn't actually answer the question that they were proposed. It's not saying, it's not answering, are you a bona fide film studio? It's saying, like, there should be no restrictions on donations because it's like a First Amendment fundamental right that should not be restricted, or whatever the fuck their conclusion was. So what they do is they call the parties, they're like, hey, here's the new question. Can you actually come re-argue that before us and argue each side of this new question we put before you? So they had the parties come argue a case for an opinion they had already written and decided they were going to endorse. What are we doing here? You already wrote the fucking opinion. Why would you change your mind after writing the opinion from like a 1 hour oral argument? Who are we fucking kidding? You're not changing your mind. You already wrote the opinion. Like, what are we talking about here? I can read the two questions that we have right here. Holding questions? Should have the questions here.
There it is.
It doesn't really matter. But yeah, so they had their.
We get it. You find it odious that they changed it. Well, okay, so you find Kennedy's the odious one.
Do you know what? Well, it's not even that. Like, so he was writing that as a concurring opinion, saying like, "Oh, someone should challenge this more broadly." They're like, "Well, we could just." Because the correct course of action, generally speaking, would be to you put out a concurrence like that, and then some other litigants, they take the signs, they go, "Oh, I see what you're getting at," and then they sue based on the grounds that the Supreme Court justice wrote, and then it goes back up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court now rules on that new issue, right? But they just didn't want to wait. They didn't want to wait for that. They're like, fuck it, we don't want to wait for the next case. We'll just do it with this one. It's like...
It seems like it's a more broad ruling.
Yeah, it's legislating from the bench. Like, that's what it's doing. It's pure activism through and through. It is literally making your own rules, ignoring everything that's supposed to constrain the court and make them not a...
Yeah, the Roberts Court's been defined by quite a bit of activism. I've never read the opinion on Citizens United versus the FEC, and I'm not exactly familiar with it, but did the court ever address the influence of money in politics and how that could hurt, that could cause some Democratic backsliding?
I think they say that financial disclosure laws will remedy that. So, like, people will know and they'll hold them accountable for what they did, which is obviously stupid, wrong, and incorrect.
Yeah.
Well, it ignores that, like, your financial disclosures probably largely come after the election's already decided, or at least enough of them will, particularly if you're doing last-minute spending. So if you're doing that,
not proactively. Well, it's interesting to feng shui that ruling. Well, since we were talking about like expansive and non-expansive liberty, feng shui that ruling with like Shelby County, it represents the start of a trend of Democratic backsliding from. Actually, I would say that trend really started in Bush v. Gore, but we're seeing my original thesis that power trends towards Republicans in whatever form it can. In this case, judicial power trends towards them, in that liberty rights are restricted and democratic rights are backsliding.
Well, funny enough, it's not even. I don't even think it's that clear. Like, the rights you and I, normal people, experience are decreasing. Religious liberty rights, if your right to be a bigot and be a racist against people, those are increasing. The rights of rich people are increasing. Like, there was a recent ruling, SECV Jarkissi or whatever, and it basically was how they punished people who were like defrauding people through security transactions and stuff, like through investments and things like that. And they're like, well, they actually have rights to a jury trial for this instead of it being adjudicated through the Securities Exchange Commission and an administrative law judge, which is impossible to do. Like the SEC cannot function in that manner, and it was a reform enacted after the 2008 recession to like allow them to. Yeah, I mean that's it's kind of a weirder one, but basically it said like it's a violation of essentially rich people's Seventh Amendment right to be brought before an administrative law judge instead of a jury. But if you're before a jury, it's just way more resources. It's harder to do. The issues tend to be like complicated, and there's no reason they should need to be brought before a jury trial for a civil issue. You don't have the right to a jury trial for civil adjudications. You have them for criminal. Civil adjudications, you only have the right to a jury for things recognized at common law, and this is, it doesn't really matter. But suffice to say, they basically made the SEC's ability to enforce securities crimes against rich people, they made it significantly harder, if not like impossible.
Because answering before the SEC is not the same as answering a jury.
Yeah, they're like, well, like, come on, they have the right to a jury trial because, like, who knows what's up with these ALJs? How, like, they're not like blind arbiters of the law like we are.
The SEC a regulatory body, and if there are criminal referrals, wouldn't that go to the Justice Department?
So the criminal elements go before the DOJ, but I'm not saying the criminal stuff. So the SEC will seek civil sanctions against people, and they could do that against individuals, and they can do that. They used to be able to do it through an ALJ, or they can go through an Article 3 court, meaning like the judiciary, the federal judiciary as we know it. An ALJ is an administrative law judge, which they exist inside the executive branch. So they're like appointees from the executive. They're not. They're not like. They don't go through the same confirmation process that judges do. They tend to get appointed by. Like heads of the SEC tend to appoint an administrative law judge, not the president, the way federal judges
Tell me if I have like an overly simplified view of the court here. So you have a Republican Supreme Court, which issues rulings which favor Republican presidential candidates during Republican presidential years, which issue rulings which favor wealthy people to influence elections, which themselves get further insulation in how much oversight they are facing from the SEC. Which in turn allows for greater influence of our electoral process through laws like through cases like Shelby County or the gerrymandering case. Is this a simplified way to look at the court that there is a trend? I hate to say the same thing again, like as a trend is power trending towards Republicans, but that's a really simple way to put it. But there is a slate of rulings that consistently benefits a very astute, loud, and active political minority that does not represent the interests of the broader American public.
Yeah, no, I think you 100% got it. So okay, I would probably split those up a little bit. So the voting rights decisions can be looked at as beholden to the Republican Party, and a lot of these things are pursuant to the Republican Party. So the voting rights stuff is going to be allowing Republicans to gerrymander and make it harder to vote and impose all these restrictions with pretextual reasoning like election fraud and whatever.
Just on that note, I have no idea how gerrymandering doesn't violate the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause.
Because fuck you, that's why.
Yeah, because fuck me. I get it. Yeah, fuck me.
Yeah, that's a particularly disgusting.
Republicans bitch about election fraud. That's the actual fraud. Somebody's vote counts and mine doesn't purely because the politicians selected who their voters were. That's election fraud.
Yeah, their pretext, the reason for that is like, well, that's a political question. It's like, no, it's actually a fundamental question to the functioning of our democracy.
I feel like that's a constitutional question. Is my vote counted? That's a constitutional question.
It's crazy because there's even a clause within the Constitution. It's like every state has each state shall guarantee to one another like a Republican form of government, meaning that you have a democratically accountable system, like a representative democracy, essentially.
Well, I mean, what do you say we're still under, even with gerrymandering, wouldn't the argument be we're under a representative democracy? How are you violating that?
So, I mean, I guess it comes down to like a question of like, what does it mean to have a representative democracy? And I think the answer to that is that everyone has a meaningful say in the representation they receive in their government, right? So if 60% of people vote one way, that they should get roughly 60% of like the power in a given government, right? What gerrymandering does is it makes it so you can have 45% of people control 67% of the seats in a government. At that point, like what is representative about this? What is democratic? You don't have a meaningful say because we've devalued your say in relation to other people's say.
I'm wagering the response to this is more form over substance. We have a representative democracy because even with gerrymandered districts, you are electing a representative and you're doing it through a democratic process.
I think that's just too literal. I mean, I understand representative democracy is like the system as a whole is supposed to represent the will of the people, right? And what gerrymandering does is it makes it so it's not the will of the people as a whole, but a subset of those people whose voices get heard because we're, packing all of you into one district and, cracking them across districts so that, you're winning more seats than your share of the popular vote would otherwise allow you to win.
Eldridge, Gary. Gerrymandering has existed since this country's founding. How has this never been resolved? Like, this is a naked political issue. How does the Supreme Court punt on this?
It wasn't really a big deal until like 2012. That's where it's like getting
midterms after the
it's called Project Red Map of the Republicans like sweeping midterm victories in 2010 and during a redistricting year, and then they won in a whole bunch of the swing states. They used that to gerrymander the state legislatures and their congressional maps in order to give Republicans like an entrenched advantage.
Only we had some sort of Voting Rights Act. The Voting Rights Act doesn't even cover that, right? Or does it? The way you redraw districts?
It would put certain limits on it. But it wouldn't fully stop it from occurring. For example, there's two terms I'm trying to remember. When you have a certain minority population, you can't diminish their power. So let's say I'll use Florida as an example. Let's say there's like 3 districts that have like a black representative. You can't like restrict it so like the black population loses a representative because you cracked them across like different districts now, which Florida did. But there's also one at a certain point when you have representation, when like let's say like I think this happened in Louisiana. Essentially, their black population rose enough to where they should essentially control or have the ability to influence significantly 2 seats, but they were gerrymandered in such a way where they only got 1 seat, and that's diminishment, right? It's diminishment and I forgot the other term I used. Let me write these down so I don't forget them. Diminishment.
This will be on the final.
Is when you remove seats. I learned this like independently while doing something else. Diminishment claims are when you take the seats they have and you remove them. And there's the other one which is I'm forgetting what it is. But basically it's like there's diminishment and there's the other one that I could probably Google it, but it's saying like when you need to give people a seat when their population's at a certain point where they should have a say, right? So, when the black population is 20%, okay, that's like 1 out of 6. It's close to, but now they're at 33%. That's 2 out of 6. You can't keep them having 1 seat because of your craftily created districts.
It's like a crime in modern American politics, but it shouldn't be, is shit talking our Constitution. Because for this very issue, we have a system that creates a very flawed democracy when we're supposed to be guaranteeing a Republican form of government. That if you had a proportional representation system without districts, you just had a parliament, you get rid of so much of this shit.
Yeah, I was trying to explain to somebody like the whole needing to like draw fair districts thing comes as a byproduct of not just having like way more representatives and like multi-member districts or a parliamentary system where you just avoid this whole fucking problem. It's just annoying.
The oldest democracy doesn't necessarily mean the best democracy.
No, it probably in fact means like, do you want the oldest car on the road? No, what? Fuck that.
Yeah.
We had all these safety upgrades. Like when we helped make the Constitution for Japan, we just said, no, we're not doing this stuff we got here. That shit's don't work well. Right. Sorry, to finish answering your question. Yeah, so like you have the election subversion shit, which is going to increase the influence of money in politics, which gives Republicans a disproportionate advantage because they're in bed with business interests, as they have been for at least the past 130 years or something, where they've been the party of big business. So it allows them and their friends to fund more and more money into political causes, which will prop up the candidates that they prefer. And they use that power to disenfranchise those who would like vote against them. And then they disempower the Voting Rights Act in order to like keep their power over these swing states, which allow them to get their judicial appointees, which then perpetuate that power cycle by allowing them to, keep, doing things that empower like wealthy people. And adjacent to that, but not like directly involved because they already have tons of money, is allowing them to get away with like financial crimes and bribery and all this other shit, which is kind of like not having, like, basically putting all of rich people above the law. But
bribery, you say? Interesting.
Yeah, it's like adjacent to. I'd say it runs adjacent to the Republicans self-dealing with like election law and all that. And then essentially just being political operatives for the Republican Party, but also helping out their rich friends. That's just also a thing they do. I think it's like two separate things, but they are related, and it's just them serving the interest of rich people. Like if you look at all the First Amendment cases or that they get for like election, like voting rights, like, oh, felons can't vote. Like, I don't know, that sounds like a violation of like your First Amendment rights and shit. Like when you're out, like what is your ability to speak? Like what's the purest form of your ability to like speak and like give political like voice to your opinions? It's like through your vote. That's how most people can express their views, right? It's like by voting, like what your preferences are. That's like the most pure and direct way where you can express like your political opinions. And we just say felons don't have that anymore. That's kind of weird, isn't it? Or even all the other restrictions put on voting. Like, how's it not also a First Amendment violation on top of a 14th and every other fucking violation when you look at it as like the purest form of like political speech is literally voting. But with all these restrictions on it, but we tell you where you can protest. You have to have these dedicated protest zones where you can only show up at and you can only be there for these hours, and we're going to do a curfew, and you can't use a bullhorn, and you have to be here, and we're going to kill you, and there's going to be cops around. Like they'll impose all these restrictions on you, going and buying a bullhorn is like $30 or whatever, right? And you can just go scream at your fucking mayor if you want. That's what normal people can do. Normal people can't start a political action committee with 3 of their friends. Each of them put $50 million in, and they start blasting everyone with an unbearable amount of ads for the things that they want about how we should be able to, shoot your baby in the face with fucking oil because this is goddamn America, and America runs on Dunkin', right? Like, but like those are the cases we get where like, well, rich people, it's actually a fundamental interest where they can spend as much as they want on ads whenever they fucking want with no restrictions, Or a recent one, it's actually called Ted Cruz versus FEC. That's like one of my favorite ones. I'll send you a podcast on it that's like really good, that just breaks down how insane it is. There were like campaign finance laws. One of the things that survived McCain-Feingold, that Citizens United ruling, was candidates loan themselves money. They're allowed to do that, and they're allowed to pay themselves back from campaign donations.
Which is a little slimy.
Well, we're about to get way slimier. So they put a limit on the amount that a candidate can pay themselves back after winning. So donations received after a candidate wins their election are restricted to $250,000. So $250,000, you can loan yourself as much money as you want, and you can pay yourself as much money as you want from your pre-election day campaign funds. But after the election, you can only pay yourself back with up to $250,000 of the post-election funds. And Ted Cruz, because he's an asshole, tried to pay himself back. I think he donated to his campaign $251,000, I think, or something like that, and then tried to pay it back with election funds donated after he had won his Senate race in 2018 or whatever. As people are found, like, whoa, hold on, it is core speech that you can, that a candidate should be able to donate themselves money and then get paid back after they had won. Which is just rank bribery. The reason we put the limit on that is because donations before an election have a very clear purpose, right? Donations before an election are because you're supporting a candidate. Why would you donate money to a campaign after an election? What's the point in that? What is that? You don't want them to win anymore. They won already. So why are you giving them money? And the answer is
election.
No, it's their own distributed campaign account, so they can pay themselves back. So you had candidates. You had candidates who were donating to their own campaigns hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then putting an interest rate on that amount of I think one of the highest was 15 or 17%. So they were charging their own campaign interest and paying themselves back, and collected $150,000 in interest money alone from their own campaign.
So it's an investment.
Yeah, well, in most campaigns, don't get that money back. If you don't enter your campaign and you lose, you don't get your money back. There's no way for you to get that money back. But if you win, you can get that money back from the donors who are now going to give it to you. People don't give you money after you fucking lose because you can't do anything for them. They're giving you money after you won because now you're in a position of power and you could do stuff for them. I think it was in Oregon or something. They even like called these apology payments because people who donated to their opponent after they won donated to them the maximum amount. They called it an apology payment. Like, thank you for the money. What can I do for you now? And it's like, I don't think those payments should be legal at all. Capping on 250 seems still ridiculous to me. But like, no, that bird's core speech, and there's no reason to actually put any restrictions on that whatsoever because what does it do? Like, you can't make a candidate better off than they were before, which is unequivocally untrue. I just said, like, one person was paying themselves interest at 17% and took down, like, I think $100,000 or $200,000 just in interest payments alone. So what are you talking about? That's not even remotely true. So it's just a way you can funnel money directly to candidates. The only people who could do that are exceedingly wealthy people.
Okay.
Like, but yeah, sorry. The long story short of that is the cases the Supreme Court gets are like rich people's ability to influence elections more often, more frequently, and in more ways. And the stuff that you, I, or normal people can do, those cases come before the court seldomly, and when they do, we don't have anywhere near as many rights as wealthy people do in making our political opinions heard.
Well, that's just the American way. Let me rapid fire some questions for you, and then we're going to close it out. Is that okay?
Sounds good. Sorry, I rant a little bit.
It was a fun 10 minutes. I'm sorry. I didn't know what to interrupt in that whole thing. I was just listening like, fuck, he's still going.
Yeah, sorry. I was like, it's a thing I hadn't like reviewed too extensively, so I was kind of like trying to remember.
Oh, there were like so many details, and I was like, I don't know when to ask a good question for it because there's like, damn, that's a lot.
It's just really stupid, and it probably came off incoherent. The
I followed it.
It's like legalized bribery.
Yeah, a candidate's able to pay himself money. He's able to collect. He's able to charge interest for those repayments, and people are able to fund those repayments by donating to his campaign after he's won an election, with the idea that he's going to use the money that's repaid to him from his donors to carry out their will. Right? It's a form of a de facto bribery, is what you're saying.
Yep, completely legal. No, hold on, not bribery. Constitutionally protected political speech. Thank you. All right.
Okay. Well.
Yeah, that was a great distillation. That is exactly what I said.
Shit, I said that
in way too many words.
20 seconds. What took you so fucking long, buddy?
Suck my fucking dick. All right. It's because I'm such a great explainer.
You wish. Okay. You are. The United States is in a horrible civil war. Everybody's dead, but we've unearthed the Constitution. We're like, okay, we're going to rebuild. You can now add one amendment to the Constitution during this rebuilding process. Which one do you add?
I think one. And I'm not going to give you exact wording, but that would guarantee. That would make a requirement that we don't allow an ultra rich class to exist. That essentially guarantees like wealth equality. Not
so you'd make a communist country.
I don't have a problem with rich people. I have a problem with billionaires. That no one should be that rich.
They're too rich.
Yeah, like no one can have more than like I don't know $50 million or something. That's the upper limit.
Have you ever been in like an actual rich person's like house? Fucking like night and day from like it's so weird like to contrast it because I remember growing up like it was just I didn't have a very good home or childhood growing up. There was a lot of financial struggle, and then one day I actually go to somebody who's in like a way different tax bracket than my family ever was in. It's just like a night and day difference between the resources they had, the access to things they had, the kind of a life they had versus like, oh, that's what it's like from the outside. All right, new question. That the country's dead, it's horrible. The Civil War destroyed it, but you've unearthed the Constitution. You now have a pair of scissors. You get rid of a part of the Constitution. What do you get rid of? And why is it the Second Amendment? It's a stupid fucking amendment. It's a stupid fucking amendment.
It's so fucking bad faith.
That's because it's been reinvented by the NRA, and everybody's just bought it as a truism.
Yeah, I just want to clarify. I'm actually totally fine with gun ownership, and I think you can get it through the 9th or the 14th or the 14th Amendment. You don't need a
constitution to protect gun ownership to have guns. You could still have no Second Amendment and still have guns.
Yeah. I think it's totally fine for individuals to have own guns. I just hate how incredibly dumb and bad faith and annoying Second Amendment people are. If I have to hear one more person say "shall not infringe" in response to me like trying to actually like talk about a serious thing, I'm gonna actually go postal with my Second Amendment rights.
Yeah, the argument that kills me about that is the argument they always present is that the founding fathers intended for this to be able to fight allow citizenry to fight a tyrannical government. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution says Congress can suppress insurrections and rebellions by calling forth militias. Which is it? They're going to suppress rebellions or they're going to support rebellions? It can't be both.
And the whole reason we have the Second Amendment is because of the why am I forgetting the name of it? There was a rebellion in like Massachusetts that they didn't have the power to like
Whiskey Rebellion or something like that.
It's not the whiskey one; it's the other one.
Oh, Shays Rebellion or
Shays Rebellion. Yeah, they couldn't like suppress. They had to get like private militias. They're like, we need to make sure we have like armed militias that the federal government can like call to bear and stuff. So it was in response literally to
an insurrection.
A libertarian wet dream. Yeah. We're like, we need that Second Amendment so we can like put down these fucking insurrectionist pieces of shit. Like it was literally the exact opposite of what the Tree of Liberty freaks said.
Have you ever seen those memes where like Jesus Christ himself is like hand delivering the Constitution and it's just like, this is the best God could come up with. Black people are 3/5 of a person. Slavery is protected. Thanks God. Baller. Great. Cool. Thanks.
No, what? If I could ratify, I'm going to ask myself a question. But if I could ratify one amendment, what would it be? And my answer would be the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which was technically never ratified, which was the Congressional Apportionment Amendment, which was one of the first 12 proposed amendments, and it was one of the only one. It's the only one that hasn't passed of the original 12 amendments proposed. We all know the first 10, the Bill of Rights. There's 12 proposed. The 11th one was actually passed in like 1996. It got finally ratified. That's
was that the Congress pay?
Yeah, it's a congressional pay one that no one gave a shit about.
So good thing they finally got around to that one.
Yeah, it was fucking stupid. It's some like dumbasses like college project or whatever. But the other one not ratified is the
Congressional Apportionment.
Yes, which basically sets a formula for increasing the members of Congress. So instead of it being 535, it'd be like 5,000 people right now.
Would that be a bad thing necessarily?
It would completely destroy the Electoral College, which makes me happy.
Oh, good. Yeah, that's a stupid ass system anyway. I remember asking. Sorry. This is my favorite question for this because of our mutual friend Deej. There's a number of people who defend the Electoral College on the basis that, well, you want to have rural parts of the country have an outsized say against cities and states to protect their interests, right? They don't mind that we occasionally have elections where the person who wins the most votes loses, and this seems to be a repeated formula every election. Like, I can't wait to see if the man with 4 million vote lead is going to win this election. So just ask this question because as what I asked Deej to find out how much he actually values democracy. If you have an electoral college, if you have another election where the popular vote goes to one candidate but the electoral college vote goes to another candidate, are you okay with that? It's like, yes, okay. Now you have the very next election, the same thing happens. You okay with that? Yes. Very next election, just keep doing this. At some point, it's very clear. You don't give a fuck about democracy, okay? It was never a priority to you. What you care about is the results that the Electoral College can give you because you have an institutional bias that favors your party. Which is what it ultimately comes down to.
Yeah, I think the best thing for this country would have been if Kerry won in 2004, if he won Ohio. If he won Ohio by a little bit, I think he got 20,000 more votes in Ohio. He would have won Ohio, won the election, and lost the popular vote. And that would have been the best thing that ever happened to this country.
Because then Republicans would be like, this shit is stupid, let's get rid of it, right?
Yeah, both parties would have been burned 2 elections in a row, and it would have been incredibly fucking funny.
I shouldn't cross my fingers for this, because Donald Trump needs to fucking lose this election. But, man, wouldn't it be sweet if he won the popular vote, but Harris wins the election? God, that would be sweet.
There was no way they're already going to attempt to coup the election. If
I'm waiting.
They're already playing electoral college too.
Last time I talked to, it didn't help that I was on shrooms the last time I talked to Destiny. But I actually talked about that very issue that they lay the groundwork for this pretty actively. They regularly make claims that there are illegals voting in our elections, despite a lack of evidence. They regularly make claims that Democrats are inviting people in to shape up or change the electorate, which just doesn't happen. You need a social security number to be an electorate in the first place, and the time it takes to become a citizen is insanely long as it is. This just isn't happening. You have the state of Florida. Not Florida. Florida's always up to some rat-fuckery. Georgia is what I meant.
I'm going to start about this fucking state.
Yeah, there's so much shit I could say. Like Georgia changing the certification rules. this belief that Mike Pence could just reject slates of electors. You have the Shelby County case. You have the Republicans defending gerrymander. You have all of this shit. Like
that means Kamala Harris can reject the slates of electors. So,
which they've already rejected that argument. Like JD Vance got asked that very argument. Like, would you be fine if Kamala Harris, said these? She's like, no, it rules for me, but not for thee.
I'm not expecting consistency. I'm just expecting it to be funny when hopefully Democrats grow a spine, and when they try and do their coup, we just be like, we control the executive right now. You're not doing it. Because at the end of the day, like, politics is about like power. Same with the Supreme Court and same with everything. We come with rules, and the rules are always backed by some form of power. But I can't remember who said it. I think it might have been Andrew Jackson. Like, I read his ruling. I'd like to see him come and enforce it.
My worry is we live under a very federalist system as it is, and states do wield outsized amounts of powers in how they do handle their election. And Republicans have shown they are very, very willing to thumb the scales in how their states conduct elections. When they close polling places, and thanks for Shelby County, typically those polling places tend to be closed in minority neighborhoods. Wait times tend to be concentrated in minority neighborhoods. Types of voter IDs that are allowable tend to be voter IDs that white people are more likely to have, or Republican voters are more likely to have, and minorities are less likely to have. And every time you point this shit out, the common refrain is the most annoying shit.
Are you saying black people are too dumb to get IDs?
Fucking kill me. No. Fucking kill me. I can't stand it. We're having two different conversations with Republicans, and leftists don't tend to take this very seriously either. Donald Trump represents a very existential threat against to the fabric of America. He represents, man. Okay, when I talked to Destiny about this, I got accused of Trump derangement system. I feel like I'm just looking at Trump like he attempted a coup. Like, I'm just saying things he's done that they do.
Did you talk to Destiny about this? I feel like he'd agree with you right now.
No, okay. It didn't help.
I don't consume him. I don't consume his content with like often or whatever. But I did see him like talking, like losing his mind about January 6th and how like Trump deserves to get shot in the head. And
no, I don't.
How he's the freak. And
last time I spoke to him, it didn't help. 6th. So I was on shrooms.
Well, I was asking how long ago it was.
It wasn't that long ago. It was like a month ago or something like that. But it didn't help that I was on shrooms. But we were having basically two different conversations past each other, where I was talking about the Republican intent to obstruct democratic norms, not just through Donald Trump, but here on forever. Like we're at a point where normal elections are kind of a thing in the past because Republicans have prioritized winning over country, right? And they will absolutely change the rules. And the conversation Destiny was trying to have was, and again, this might just be my fault because I'm on shrooms. I'm not saying I'm innocent in this. I was fucking high. But it was basically saying, well, Donald Trump's just going to fuck off this election because ultimately power tilts towards those who can win. And Donald Trump has shown himself to be a loser consistently. So after this election, Republicans are just going to figure their shit out. Trump's going to fuck off, and I guess we'll live in a merry, happy land after.
Right. How many times these dumb shit libs want to be wrong about this? I don't know what to fucking.
Well, I don't know if Donald Trump is. I don't think Donald Trump's going to fuck off if he loses. Donald Trump's not running for president. He's running from prison. Okay, it's in his interest to stay in this relevant.
When he's in federal prison and at no time prior to that.
Inshallah, justice will finally be had. He seems to think, so Destiny seems to think that the only reason Donald Trump commands the power he does is because he has an outsized say in the Republican Party and they support him. And so long as he continues to maintain that support, he will continue to have an outsized say. But once he loses, the party itself is going to say, well, he's a loser, we're not going to support him anymore. But my contention was they have supported him up to this point. He attempted a coup and they still support him. He has an outsized say because he's a cult leader. Yes.
We've already had a trial run of that argument, though, right? He lost in 2020.
And he didn't fuck off.
Well, yeah. And the argument could be like, well, yeah, but he's denying he lost, so they don't believe he actually lost. It's like, well, he's going to do it again this time.
Of course.
So why would they not just do it? Why would they not run it back again? It does not make any sense because, like I said, that we've literally ran that game already, Donald Trump lost. They're like, well, now we're gonna move on. Like the fever's gonna break. The fever's gonna break. Yo, they are the
fever's turned to delirium now. Like this, we're past the fever breaking. These fuckers are on bath salts now.
It's this bullshit that stems from thinking like Trump is the problem instead of like the natural extension of a thing that's been cultivated for 50 years.
Trump does what Trump does. He puts his name to brand something, right, that already exists. That's what Trump does. Trump University itself is just a scam. He's just a scam artist. He's a con artist that put his finger on the pulse of the American right, who's regularly trafficked in conspiratorial bullshit and racist tropes. He's put his finger on that pulse, and he took ownership of it. Right? The American right has always entertained violent rhetoric, even before Donald Trump was ever their president. They have always entertained, like, what I tried to say to Destiny, and again, I didn't say this well, I was on shrooms. What I tried to say to Destiny was, we're on a civilizational precipice because what Donald Trump represents is the erosion of a certain class of Americans that have been historically benefited by law, society, and culture. And what they are seeing is that power being slowly eroded as America becomes more diverse, as becomes more progressive. They're afraid of losing their place in a cultural superiority, and they are violently defending themselves. They have, and they continue to violently defend themselves. And this isn't going to end with Trump. Trump, he foments it. He entertains it. He even promotes it. But he didn't create it, right? He's a symptom of a problem. He's not the cause of a problem. The problem is that much bigger.
Yeah, but I would like add to that a little bit that this is not a new thing. You can look back. There's an article called "The Paranoid Style in American Politics," the John Birch Society, which emerged in the 1950s, which is basically the forerunner to Alex Jones. With they're like, there's the New World Order and the communist takeover and the Jewish plot and like all that crazy shit. There's a communist plan to like, the John Birch Society basically spread the rumors that like Eisenhower was a communist and stuff like that. Like they're insane. They were insane people. And that basically underpinned like a lot of the support from Eugene McCarthy, who was unbelievably popular during the HUAC, the House for Un-American Activities Committees in the 50s, I think, 50s and 60s.
HUAC. Sorry, I couldn't resist.
Yeah, which was once again all like anti-communist, paranoid insanity.
Which we're seeing a revisit of, which is just the weirdest thing. The USSR isn't even around anymore, and these motherfuckers still complain about communism.
Yeah, my point is like these freaks have always been there. In varying degrees of power, right? Like the thing William F. Buckley is sort of known for is like purging the Birchers from the conservative movement. This is not true. What he did is he purged some of their like most virulent figureheads, and then he like brought their ideas into the fold by literally cutting out some of the more hyperbolic things, like instead of saying Jews, like saying elites or whatever, right? That's a William F. Buckley thing. He just brought the crazy and then removed like 20% off the top. And then mainstreamed it. So he just mainstreamed the psychopathy through National Review and everything else this dumb freak did. But that was always like sort of in the background. And like the only thing that changed with Trump is Trump marked the shift of the crazy, rabid, paranoid base of the Republican Party going from a thing that empowered, the neocons or whatever, who were just like, looked at them with some sort of like disdain, basically, like look down upon these people, to like them taking over the party. And that's the shift Trump marked, of them successfully taking over the party and the crazies getting in control of it. That's what that actually marks. But like that element has been in American politics as long as we've been a country might be a little bit too long, but at least for the last like 70, 80 years, you probably go back a little bit further with some other elements. Has always been there, and the only difference now is that it completely controls one of our major political parties, which it has not in the past.
It's evolved as a byproduct of the internet and in the age of mass media.
Yeah, I think advanced.
All right, Joe. I said like 5 minutes ago, but that was like 20 minutes ago. So I really suck at timekeeping because I was having fun with that section of the conversation. So I'll send you the video on Destiny if you want to go watch it.
Send it to me. I'm curious.
All right, final words, final opinions. Say whatever you want to say. Go on, go now.
I'd recommend like a few things. I think I sent you. Okay, fine. I sent you a podcast you should listen to. It's the Master Plan 1. I swear, the conspiracy theory I said in the begining is like an actual thing that occurred that is documented, very well documented. In fact, you can look it all up yourself, see everything they wrote. It's the exact thing that we saw happen over the past 50 years. Also, I sent you an article that summarizes your view of how Republicans are going to overthrow. How they're going to use pretextual reasoning of election fraud to throw out election results in states like Georgia if Democrats win, and then try and do an electoral college coup again. If I were giving you and anyone else listening solace, it would be that the main difference is when there was going to be riots in response to that in 2020. The plan was to invoke the Insurrection Act. The president invokes the Insurrection Act. Joe Biden is the president, not Donald Trump. I think Democrats will not tolerate a Bush v. Gore style fuckery again from either the Supreme Court or some other bullshit. That doesn't put us in a good place, but it's better than the alternative where we're ruled by these dumb fascist freaks.
Okay, cool. Anything else you want to add?
Nope, that's it.
All right, buddy. Thank you. Peace, love, rock and roll. You have a good night, okay?
All right. You too, buddy. Bye.